They say the little things are what make a marriage. A shared glance across a crowded room, the way you both know what the other is thinking without a word, the comfort of a routine built over years. But they never tell you that the little things are also what can break it. Not in a sudden, explosive shatter, but in a slow, grinding erosion of goodwill. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. And on Tuesday, October 26th, I learned that a leftover lasagna could be the sharpest paper cut of all. I'm Ian Ward. I'm 34 years old. My wife, Clara, is 33. We live in an apartment we've rented for the last 3 years, a nice enough place with an open-plan living area where the kitchen, dining room, and living room bleed into one another. It's a design choice that's supposed to foster togetherness. On this particular Tuesday, it was about to become a theater for a Cold War. The day had been long, one of those draining office marathons where every email feels urgent and every meeting could have been an email. I walked through our front door with the weight of the workday still settled on my shoulders. My tie loosened my mind, craving a simple reward for having survived another Tuesday. Clara was already home, curled up in the big armchair, scrolling on her phone. The soft blue light of the screen illuminated her face, casting shadows that made her look distant. This was our evening ritual, the slow, quiet decompression before the inevitable question hung in the air between us, a silent, ticking clock. What's for dinner? In our apartment, that mundane question had started to feel like a negotiation, a verbal chess match, where one person's satisfaction meant the other's reluctant acceptance. For the past few weeks, it felt like I was always the one in check. Compromise is a beautiful concept, but when one person does all the compromising, it stops being a partnership and starts feeling like a polite form of surrender. I dropped my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter echoing too loudly in the quiet. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, ostensibly for a bottle of water, but really for reconnaissance. I was surveying the battlefield, and there it was, sitting on the middle shelf in its glass sarcophagus, the leftover lasagna. It was from Sunday night. Clara had made it, and to be fair, on Sunday, it was pretty good. But we'd also had it for lunch on Monday. Now it was staring at me with the cold, congealed indifference of a meal that had long overstayed its welcome. It was practical. It was easy. It was there. And I knew with a sinking certainty this was going to be Clara's answer, for her food was about fuel and efficiency. If a perfectly good meal existed, wasting it was a cardinal sin. For me, especially after a day like today, a meal was more than fuel. It was an experience, a punctuation mark at the end of a long day. I didn't want a practical meal. I wanted a pleasant one. My eyes scanned past the lasagna and landed on my secret weapon, nestled in its butcher paper in the crisper drawer. A beautiful, thick-cut fillet of salmon. Right next to it was a fresh bunch of asparagus. I had bought them myself just 2 days earlier on Sunday, October 24th, during our weekly grocery shop. While Clara focused on the list with military precision, I had wandered over to the seafood counter. The salmon called to me. I imagined it pan-seared skin, crispy and golden, the flesh, flaky and pink. It was a simple meal, but it felt intentional. A treat. "What's that for?" Clara had asked at the checkout. "Just thought it'd be nice for one night this week," I'd said. Maybe Tuesday. She'd given a non-committal shrug, more focused on our coupons. But in my mind, Tuesday night was salmon night. It was the little bright spot I'd mentally bookmarked to get me through the week. My small, self-promised joy. Now standing in the kitchen, the silence felt heavy. I looked over at Clara, still absorbed in her phone. It's strange how you can share a home with someone and feel like you're on 2 different planets. Her planet was the sensible, practical world of leftover lasagna. Mine was a place where a man who worked hard all day deserved a decent piece of fish if he wanted it. Tonight, I was not in the mood to be a tourist in her world. I knew I had to speak first. If I waited, the lasagna would be presented not as an option, but as a foregone conclusion. "Hey," I said, my voice a little too casual, "getting hungry." She looked up, her eyes adjusting to the room. "Oh, yeah, me too." There it was, the opening. The question was now officially on the table, hovering between the kitchen island and her armchair. This was the moment the path of our evening would be decided. Would it be a path of mutual agreement or another quiet trek down the road of my resignation? I decided to launch a preemptive strike. I wouldn't suggest the salmon, that would be too confrontational, my desire pitted directly against hers. Instead, I'd offer a neutral third party, a delicious, unimpeachable buffer. I took a breath, preparing my opening statement for the great dinner debate, having no idea that I wasn't just deciding on a meal. I was making a declaration of independence. So I began, my voice carefully calibrated to sound relaxed. I was thinking, what about that little Thai place on Milner? We haven't had their panang curry in ages. The time was exactly 6:45 p.m. The opening shot in the great dinner war of Tuesday, October 26th, had been fired. It was a good opening shot, I thought. Non-threatening, inclusive. A suggestion that recalled a shared happy memory. Who could argue with delicious, creamy Penang curry? Clara looked up from her phone, but not all the way. Her eyes were still sort of aimed at the screen, a clear signal that I did not have her full attention. Why would we do that? She asked. Her tone wasn't argumentative, not yet. It was genuinely perplexed, as if I'd just suggested we wallpaper the ceiling with bacon. We have the lasagna. She said it so simply. We have the lasagna. 3 words delivered with the unshakable certainty of a physicist stating the law of gravity. To her, this was not an opinion. It was a fact. The existence of the lasagna in our refrigerator rendered all other dinner possibilities null and void. I know, I said, trying to keep my own voice light. I'm just really not feeling lasagna tonight. I leaned against the counter, trying to look like a man having a reasonable discussion. It was a long day. You know the quarterly reports are due Friday. My brain feels like scrambled eggs. I was just craving something different, something with a little spice. I was pleading my case, but I was also telling the absolute truth. My day had been a monotonous grind of spreadsheets and conference calls, where my input was requested but never actually heard. I felt like a ghost in my own career. That little kick of lemongrass and chili and a good Thai curry felt like the only thing that could remind my taste buds, and by extension me, that I was still alive. Clara finally put her phone down on the arm of the chair, screen down. This was a sign of escalation. It meant she was now dedicating her full cognitive power to dismantling my argument. Ian, she said. And she used that patient tone, the one a kindergarten teacher uses to explain why you can't eat paste. The lasagna is perfectly good. I made it 2 days ago. There are at least 2 big portions left. If we order Thai food, the lasagna will just sit there. It'll probably go bad by Thursday, and we'll have to throw it out. She laid out her points like a prosecutor giving a closing argument. Point 1, the lasagna exists. Point 2, it is edible. Point 3, not eating it would lead to waste. The verdict was clear. My desire for Thai food was an argument in favor of wastefulness. It was financially irresponsible and logically unsound. It's not about the lasagna being bad, I countered, feeling my patience start to fray. I'm sure it's fine. I just don't want it. We had it Sunday night, and I had it for lunch yesterday. I'm just lasagnaed out. That doesn't make any sense, she said, shaking her head slightly, a little smile on her face. That wasn't a smile at all. It was a mask of pity for my flawed logic. It's food, Ian. It's fuel. We have good fuel here for free. Ordering takeout is literally spending $25, maybe $30, just because you're not in the mood for the free option. She was doing it again. She was framing my feelings as a childish whim, a luxury we couldn't afford. It wasn't about the $30. I knew it, and she knew it. We were comfortable. $30 for takeout once in a while was a rounding error in our budget. This was about the principle, her principle. The principle that practicality must always triumph over preference. That efficiency was the highest virtue, and my desire for a small moment of pleasure was a character flaw. The air in the room was getting thick. The easy end-of-day quiet had been replaced by a tense, humming silence. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a drumbeat counting down to a confrontation. "Okay," I said, shifting tactics. "Forget the Thai food. Bad idea. You're right, it's extra money." I was extending an olive branch. I was showing her I could see her point of view. "What about the salmon I bought?" I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance. I had just sidestepped her primary argument about cost, forcing her to find a new one. "The salmon," she repeated as if I'd just referred to a mythical creature. "Yeah, the salmon. From the grocery trip on Sunday. I bought it specifically for tonight. Remember, I could pan-sear it really quick. Roast some of that asparagus. It would take me, 20 minutes? It's here. It's paid for. It won't go to waste." I had her. By her own logic, this was a perfectly sound proposal. It used existing assets. It incurred no new costs. It prevented waste because the salmon would need to be cooked in the next day or so anyway. It was checkmate. Or so I thought. Clara, my wife of 6 years, the woman who could find a logical flaw in a sunrise, took a slow breath. "But then I'd have to make something for myself," she said. I stared at her, genuinely baffled. "What? No, you wouldn't. You can have the lasagna. You want the lasagna. You've been making the case for the lasagna for the past 10 minutes. So you're going to cook a completely separate, elaborate meal for yourself, and I'm just supposed to microwave a plate of leftovers?" she asked. Her voice was dangerously calm. And there it was. The real issue. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about waste. It was about the optics. It was about the perceived unfairness of me having a freshly cooked, delicious meal, while she had the practical, sensible leftovers. Even though the leftovers were her choice, her insistence, the principle wasn't just about practicality. It was about a forced, miserable equality. If she had to eat the boring leftovers, then I did too. My pleasure was an insult to her sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was entirely self-imposed. "That's not fair, Clara," I said, and my voice was harder now. "You're the one who wants the lasagna. I'm offering a solution where we both get what we want. You get your leftovers, and I cook the salmon I already bought. We both win." "It doesn't feel like we both win," she said, crossing her arms. "It feels like you're refusing to be a team. A team eats the same meal. A team makes a plan and sticks to it. Our plan should be to eat the food we have before it goes bad. We never made that plan." My voice was rising now, and I hated it. "You decided that was the plan the second I walked in the door. I was never consulted. My vote was never counted. You just assumed I would fall in line like I always do." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and true. This was the heart of it. This was about every weekend plan that quietly morphed into what she wanted to do. Every vacation spot I suggested that was vetoed for a more practical option every time my want was dismissed as trivial next to her need. The clock on the wall showed 6:58 p.m. We had been locked in this ridiculous, infuriating standoff for 13 minutes. 13 minutes of my life spent debating the merits of a 2-day-old baked pasta dish. "This is ridiculous," she said, echoing my thoughts, but for entirely different reasons. "It's just dinner, Ian. I don't understand why you have to make everything so difficult. Just eat the lasagna. It's fine. It's not a big deal." That was what ended it. The final fatal blow. It's not a big deal. 3 little words that expertly and efficiently erased everything I felt. My stressful day. Not a big deal. My desire for a small comfort. Not a big deal. My opinion. My preference. Me not a big deal. The only thing that was a big deal was the lasagna. The lasagna was sacrosanct. The lasagna was the hill she had chosen to die on. I looked at her. Truly looked at her. My wife, aged 33, a smart, capable woman sitting in her armchair in our jointly rented apartment, ready to sacrifice our entire evening's peace and harmony at the altar of leftover pasta. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It was the click of a lock, the sound of a door swinging shut, the part of me that was willing to bend the part that would eventually sigh and say, "Okay, fine, I'll have the lasagna, just..." went quiet. It packed a bag and left the building. I looked at the clock. The second hand swept upwards, touching the 12. It was 7:00 p.m. The negotiation was over. The possibility of a shared compromise meal had just been terminated. She had made her position clear. There was only one acceptable outcome. Her outcome. I stood there in the silence for a few seconds, letting her words hang in the air. It's not a big deal. You know what I said? My voice suddenly calm, all the frustration gone, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. You're right. A look of relief washed over her face. She thought she'd won. She thought I was finally capitulating. Good, she said, reaching for her phone again, the crisis averted. I'll heat it up in a... No, I said, cutting her off. The word was quiet but absolute. You're right, it's not a big deal. I turned my back on her. I walked to the refrigerator, the same one I'd stared into just 15 minutes earlier when this whole thing started. I opened the door. My movements were deliberate, economical. I reached past the glass tomb of the lasagna. I did not even look at it. I reached into the crisper drawer and my fingers closed around the cool, slick butcher paper. I pulled out the salmon, then I took out the bunch of asparagus. I closed the refrigerator door and placed them on the counter. I turned and walked to the pantry, retrieved a bottle of olive oil and a box of sea salt. I set them next to the fish. Then I went to the drawer by the stove and took out my favorite non-stick skillet and a baking sheet. I did all of this in complete unbroken silence. I could feel her eyes on my back, watching my every move. I could feel her confusion radiating across the room, turning into disbelief, and then into a simmering, impotent anger. The debate was over. The discussion was finished. She had refused my offer of a third-party truce with the Thai food. She had refused my offer of a peaceful coexistence with the salmon and lasagna. She had drawn a line in the sand and insisted that her way was the only way. She had terminated our joint venture. Fine. At 7:01 p.m., I was officially declaring my dinner a sole proprietorship, and the new owner was about to cook himself a fantastic meal. The first sound was the rush of water from the faucet as I rinsed the asparagus stalks. It was loud in the silence. I snapped the woody ends off each one, the crisp thwack echoing in our small kitchen. I laid them out in a neat row on the baking sheet, a little green army preparing for battle. I could feel Clara's stare like a physical weight on my shoulders. She hadn't moved from her armchair. I imagined her knuckles were white where she gripped her phone. Good. Let her watch. I drizzled the olive oil over the asparagus. My movements were slow, almost ceremonial. I rolled the stalks back and forth until they glistened under the kitchen lights. Then I reached for the sea salt. I didn't just shake it on. I took a pinch between my thumb and forefinger and sprinkled it from a height just like I'd seen chefs do on TV. It felt absurd, but it also felt right. This wasn't just about sustenance. It was about the principle of the thing. Every action was a sentence in a declaration I was writing in real time. My choices matter. My desires are valid. I am not invisible. I opened the oven. The preheat light was on. I slid the baking sheet onto the middle rack and closed the door with a soft, definitive click. 20 minutes. Perfect. Now for the main event, the salmon. I had bought this beautiful fillet 2 days ago on Sunday, October 24th, during our weekly grocery trip. I'd had a plan for it then, maybe a nice dinner for us both later in the week. Funny how things work out. I unwrapped the butcher paper. The fish was perfect, a vibrant pinkish orange. I laid it on the cutting board and gently patted it dry with a paper towel. Moisture is the enemy of a good sear. I took the sea salt again, seasoning the flesh side. Then a few grinds of black pepper. I turned on the burner under my non-stick skillet. I let it get hot. Not warm, but properly hot. I added a swirl of olive oil. It shimmered almost instantly. This was the point of no return. Once that fish hit the pan, the entire apartment was going to smell like what we could have been eating together. Using a spatula, I gently lowered the salmon fillet into the skillet skin side down. The sizzle was immediate and ferocious. It was an angry, violent sound that shattered the tense quiet. It was the sound of my decision made real, of my defiance taking a physical form. It was louder than any word I could have shouted. It was the sound of a border being drawn right down the middle of our shared kitchen. On one side, a cold, monolithic block of lasagna in a glass dish. On the other, a perfectly seasoned piece of salmon, its skin crisping up in hot oil. I didn't look at her. I didn't have to. I could feel the waves of indignation rolling off of her. This wasn't just cooking anymore. This was a performance, and she was my captive audience of one. For the next 4 minutes, the only sound in the world was that aggressive, beautiful sizzle. I just stood there watching the edges of the salmon turn opaque as the heat climbed up the sides of the filet. I could hear the subtle shift of fabric as she moved in her chair. I could hear the sharp, irritated taps of her finger on her phone screen. She was scrolling, trying to pretend she didn't care, trying to project an aura of utter nonchalance. But the silence between the sizzles was too heavy. You can't ignore a smell like that. The aroma of garlic olive oil and searing fish was now the dominant force in the room, a fragrant testament to my refusal to be dismissed. At the 4-minute mark, I took my spatula, slid it carefully under the fillet, and flipped it. The skin was magnificent, golden brown, crispy, perfect. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Another 2 minutes on the flesh side. I added a knob of butter to the pan, a few cloves of crushed garlic, and a sprig of rosemary I found in the fridge. The smell intensified, becoming richer, more complex. It smelled like a restaurant. It smelled like victory. The oven timer beeped. I turned off the burner for the salmon and let it rest in the hot pan. I pulled on an oven mitt, opened the oven door, and slid out the baking sheet. The asparagus was perfect, tender, crisp, and slightly browned at the tips. The entire operation had taken just under 25 minutes. I took out one of our good dinner plates. Just one. I slid the roasted asparagus onto the plate first, arranging it neatly. Then, with the utmost care, I lifted the salmon from the skillet and placed it on top of the asparagus skin side up. I spooned a little of the garlic rosemary butter from the pan over the fish. It glistened. It was a beautiful plate of food. It was a meal born of pure, unadulterated spite, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever cooked. I set my single place at the dining table. 1 plate, 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 paper napkin. I poured myself a glass of water. I did not ask if she wanted one. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was exactly 7:30 p.m. 0 point. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, my back partially to her, but my actions in her full peripheral vision. I picked up my knife and fork. The weight of them felt significant in my hands. I could feel her watching me. The scrolling on her phone had stopped. The silence was absolute, now a held breath. I cut into the salmon. The crispy skin crackled under the pressure of my knife. The fish flaked apart perfectly, revealing a moist, tender interior. I made sure a piece of that skin was on the fork along with a flake of the salmon. I lifted the fork to my mouth, and I took my first bite. The world seemed to slow down. The flavor was incredible. The salty, crispy skin, the rich, buttery fish, the hint of garlic and rosemary. It was without a doubt the most satisfying bite of food I had ever eaten in my entire life. Not because of the taste, but because of what it represented. It was a bite of self-respect, a bite of quiet rebellion, a bite that said, I am here, and I matter. I continued to eat. I ate slowly, deliberately. I savored every single mouthful. I would take a bite of salmon, then a stalk of asparagus. I took a sip of water. I was not just eating dinner. I was making a statement. I was demonstrating that my comfort and my happiness were things I was capable of providing for myself with or without her cooperation. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her put her phone down on the arm of the chair. She was just sitting there now in our jointly rented apartment, a statue of resentment. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Her jaw was set. She was staring into the middle distance at the wall just past my head. She was trapped. She couldn't storm off to the bedroom without looking childish. She couldn't turn on the TV without acknowledging the new bizarre dynamic in the room. And she certainly couldn't go and heat up her precious lasagna now. To do so would be to admit defeat, to concede that we were having separate meals because she had refused to compromise. Her stubbornness had built her a prison, and she was the sole inmate. I ate my entire meal. I finished every last flake of salmon, every last stalk of asparagus. I used my fork to gather the last crispy bits from the plate. When I was done, the plate was clean. I took another sip of water, then dabbed my mouth with the paper napkin. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor. I stood up, picked up my single plate, my single fork, my single knife, and my single glass. I carried them to the sink. I turned on the hot water and washed my dishes. I washed the plate, scrubbing it clean. I washed the fork and the knife. I placed them in the drying rack. Then I washed the skillet and the baking sheet I had used. I cleaned up my entire workspace, wiping down the counters until there was no trace of my meal prep, save for the lingering, delicious smell in the air. My goal for the evening had been simple: to eat a meal of my own choosing, rather than capitulate to a choice I had already rejected. And I had succeeded, utterly. I had prepared and consumed the entire meal I desired. I had asserted my own small pocket of autonomy in our shared life. It wasn't a solution to our bigger problems, I knew that, but for tonight it was enough. I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned to face the room. Clara, my wife aged 33, was still sitting in the armchair exactly where I had left her. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of obstinate pride. And in the refrigerator, under the cold, unforgiving light, the leftover lasagna sat in its glass tomb, untouched.